One of them wanted to be the security guy. He claimed he was a security guy.
Welcome to another edition of Security Guy Radio with Chuck Harold.
And Paul Tally-Ho Bristow.
I thought we were going to change Tally-Ho.
I was going to have Secret Squirrel, but I didn't bring me Secret Squirrel.
Oh, well,
dummy with me,
I
so
don't think we can go with Secret Squirrel.
I only brought me policeman's helmet.
Well, I might say, Chuck, take it on the chin, Harold, today, because we have it's about domestic violence.
Yes.
And this kind of ties into some other shows we've been doing about workplace violence, which has a domestic violence component, because that was a nice sound effect. What was that?
That was my glasses.
Hitting the glasses on the spring. That's
yeah.
nice. So there's about what was the stats with our friend Patrick? About 80% of domestic violence. No, 80% of domestic violence in workplace is domestic violence component.
Yeah.
It's huge,
Yeah.
because the abused spouse may have gone to a hotel, might have gone to the mother's, but they still got to go to work.
And that's
People
where you're going to
can find
find everybody.
Yeah.
Well.
So what we're going to try to do today is go over a couple of stats for domestic violence, which I think everybody's going to find interesting. For example, every 9 seconds in the United States, a woman is assaulted or beaten. At 9 seconds, that's remarkable. And around the world, at least 1 in every 3 women has been beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused during her lifetime. Most often, the abuser is a member of the own family. I guess this holds true for the sexual abuse too, which is not nice. Domestic violence is the leading cause of injury to women, more than car accidents, muggings, and rapes. Now, this I was kind of surprised about. Of course, it's also death is the number 1 cause of injury for women in the workplace. In other
That's
words,
right.
Yeah.
It has been for years. I know.
Yeah.
I think there's 35 women killed each year.
Yeah, it's very
the
sad.
workplace.
It's very sad. Studies suggest that up to 10 million children witness some form of domestic violence annually. Nearly 1 in 5 teenage girls who have been in a relationship said a boyfriend threatened violence or self-harm if presented with a breakup. And this ties into the stalking issue, right?
Yeah.
So we've had our stalking people on. So really, this effort between all the disciplines of the stalking analysts and the domestic violence people and workplace violence people, it all ties together. And really, I think, my personal opinion is it starts with the domestic violence. But for the domestic violence, we wouldn't have as much workplace violence, we wouldn't have as much, child abuse and things like that. So it's really important. Every day in the U.S., more than 3 women are murdered by their husbands or boyfriends. 92% of women surveyed listed reducing domestic violence and sexual assault as their top concern. Now that's interesting.
Yeah.
92% said it's not their TV. They want a new TV.
Yeah.
They want to reduce domestic violence. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
weird. That's weird to me. Domestic violence victims lose nearly 8 million days of work per year, and this alone should get people interested, right? And that's equivalent to 32,000 full-time jobs. This stuff just blows my mind. I can't read anymore.
It's amazing.
I'm so disturbed. Read some
Yeah.
for us. Read some more.
Based on reports from 10 countries, because domestic violence was pretty high in the UK and still is. A lot of it alcoholism related as well. But from 10 countries, between 55% and 95% of women who have been physically abused by their partners had never contacted the governments.
The bobbies.
Coppers, etc. Which, again, is very, very troubling. I think it's one of the worst things. And then the cost, of intimate partner violence exceeds $5.8 billion per year.
Unbelievable.
It's a lot of money, right?
Right, and $4.1 billion are direct medical and health care services, which, with the new Affordable Care Act, this is all going to become much more complicated. Much more complicated.
That's true.
I mean, will the women of victims of domestic violence, or men as well, will they get the health care they need? I mean, who knows? I mean, it could be really a problem.
And then, obviously, and we've known this for a long time, that men who as children witness domestic violence within the family tend to abuse their own wives as they get older.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been an issue for years, isn't it?
So we got some of this information from safehorizon.org, and they broke it down into different categories where the impact is the most. So, for victims, we talked about it. 1 in 4 will experience domestic violence during their lifetime. Women experience more than 4 million physical assaults and rapes of their partners. Men are the victims of nearly 3 million physical assaults. Now look at that.
Yeah.
We have 4 million women having physical assaults, being victims of physical assaults, and 3 million men. That's kind of
Well,
interesting.
yeah, I mean, I remember years ago when I was a copper dealing with a male victim, and the problem then with male victims is the fact that nobody recognises it.
Right, and they're not going to report it either.
Nobody recognises
Right.
it. It's a, it's. I mean, it was an interesting experience trying to even get the court to recognise it. And I'm going back in the day, of course.
In the day.
In the day.
Yeah. What was it? The year 1632 when the British Empire.
Yes, a while back.
So women ages 20 to 24 are at the greatest risk of becoming victims of domestic violence. This I found. Again,
Yeah, it's a little bit.
well, I mean, I did all this stuff as a cop.
Yeah.
This is from SafeHorizon.org, but if you have a long-term relationship, been married 30 years, and you got some abuse going on, I think that number is going to be a little different. Every year, 1 in 3 women who is a victim of homicide is murdered by their current or former partner. And we have some information about families. 3 million children witness the violence. We saw that before. 2003 study found that children are more likely to intervene when they witness severe violence against a parent.
I wonder if they get hurt.
Well,
during
I'm
it.
sure. Yeah,
Must do,
absolutely. Yeah. Domestic violence is most likely to occur between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. Now, I knew this when I was a copper of that time.
Yeah.
We called it the domestic violence clock, so to speak,
Yeah.
right? So you get home at 6 p.m. and, at 7 you start squabbling. By midnight you're fighting. 3 a.m. you're punching each other. The cops come at 6 a.m. and you break the cycle and it kind of
I
goes
wonder if
on.
there's any difference. We haven't really got the stats, but I wonder if there's any difference between the weekend and the.
I
the
didn't see
week,
that. I didn't see any.
Because
of
I know
that.
at home, guys getting home from the pub used to be a real problem.
Yep.
On a Sunday afternoon. Boy, that was a busy shift on a Sunday afternoon for domestic violence.
Domestic violence is most likely to. More than 60% of domestic violence incidents happen at home. We kind of.
Yeah.
But you know what? That seems low to me.
Well,
I mean,
that's true.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
well, no, I guess if you put the workplace, because the
You bring the
crazy
work-
stalker
yeah, that's
boyfriend's going to come into the
Yeah.
workplace. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's
Makes
the place
sense.
they're going to find you guys.
So, according to U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, domestic violence is the third leading cause of homelessness among families.
Yeah.
That's-
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
In New York, 25% of the homeless heads of households became homeless due to domestic violence. This is we all know it's a serious problem, but when you hear this, it just really hits home.
Yeah.
Survivors of domestic violence face high rates of depression, sleep disturbances, anxiety flashbacks,
I
other
would imagine
emotional
so.
stuff. Yeah. You read a couple there.
Yeah, domestic violence contributes to obviously poor health for the.
Did you say
for the
contributes?
survivors. Contributes.
That's British, ladies and gentlemen. That's
Yeah.
contributes. Go ahead.
Contributes.
I digress.
That's like schedule.
Okay.
Schedule.
That's right.
Chronic conditions such as heart disease and obviously stomach disorders. Among women brought to emergency rooms due to domestic violence, most were socially isolated, which you can see, right? They pull away from their family,
Right.
and people that they know, which is one of the biggest problems, right? Because nobody's seeing it. at
Well,
some
then
point.
girls who witness domestic violence are more vulnerable to abuse as teens and adults. So if they witness mom getting slapped around, they're gonna take it. It's a cycle.
I mean, I've heard people say that women that have been in abusive households as children tend to get married to men that abuse, which is, for a man, it's sort of hard to understand that. And I think that's part of the whole problem with the domestic violence, understanding domestic violence, is a lot of those sort of areas.
It is confusing because the victim, you would think, would say, I got
Well, that's
slapped
enough of
twice.
that,
That's
right?
enough.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of reasons why they stay, and that's the number one question I used to ask.
Yeah.
We would come to the call and say, "Can I take you to your friend's house? Can we get you in a hotel?" No, that's okay. He's not going to kill me. He just slaps me around, so I'm better off staying here.
And law enforcement has a problem understanding that.
Well,
I think.
the problem we had back in the day was slapping your wife. Let's just don't give me any phone calls. I'm not saying this to pick on women, but let's just say slapping your wife around or your husband was a misdemeanor not committed in my presence as a police officer. I could not arrest unless the wife or husband said, I want her arrested or him arrested. If it rose to the level of a felony where we thought there were severe injuries, we could do that. So, and I had some little cases. I mean, my worst case was a domestic violence call in Culver City down on Green Valley, and me and my partner who I was training came in, listened at the door, and we heard a woman inside screaming, don't kill me, don't kill me. We kicked the door in, and the boyfriend had the girlfriend hanging out the third-story window, strangling her. So I pulled the guy off. My partner grabbed the victim, and the guy backs up against the wall, puts his hands up and says, "Don't shoot me." And I go, "Dude, I'm not pointing my gun at you. Just relax. Everybody calm down. We're going to make this good." He kept saying, "Don't shoot me," and I was perplexed as to what he was talking about. Then he grabbed my gun. All right, so now I got him grab my gun, and next thing I know, the wife is on my back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and my partner is kind of like standing there going, what should I do now? You should call for backup. So this went on for a few minutes. He's trying to pull my gun out. She's on my back. Long story short, I pushed him into the bathroom, pushed him down, and it took about 3 or 4 minutes for backup to get there.
Yeah.
And then we hooked him up, and unfortunately he died. Turned out he had cocaine in his system and just a freak thing and all that kind of stuff. It was kind of sad. But here, this woman, this is part of the victimology, she's going to be thrown out a third-story window. If I hadn't kicked that door in, she'd be dead. And when I save her, she jumps on my back and gets mad at me because I'm picking on her.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that in a minute
Yeah.
with our expert, why that happens. It's kind of interesting. What's your worst one?
I think the worst one I had was I arrived at a domestic violence in Tottenham, actually, where all the riots were a couple of years ago, which was where I was a copper on the streets. And as I opened the door, as the door opened, a double-barrel shotgun was facing me, literally, one for each eye. So it was quite an experience. And then, unfortunately, my partner struck this chap across the head with his truncheon, but not hard enough to actually lower the gun. So it was probably only a second, but it certainly seemed like a lifetime. And we had the same problem. You know, he'd really beaten up his wife, and then she wouldn't prosecute, so we ended up arresting everybody, actually, for which was an alternative in the UK that you didn't really have over here. So
Well, we used to come back 2 or 3 times to a house, and I had a guy staying at a hotel on Washington Boulevard one day. Went out 3 times. The husband kept slamming the door in my face. And I said, "Sir, if I got to come back here, I'm going to figure out something to take you to jail for." And the 4th time I came back, the wife was, this is the middle of winter, Christmas Eve. She's out cold in the parking lot of this little motel, not moving. The husband's gone, and their infant is gone. I find him walking on Washington Boulevard with my partner. I stopped him. I said, "I told you I'm taking you to jail." He says, "You can't take my child." I told my partner, "Hey, come here, put your hands right underneath the baby." So this guy's scratching his head going, "What is this crazy cop doing?" I said, "See this big heavy flashlight? I'm going to count to 3. I'm going to smack it right on the top of your head. You're going to go, ouch. You're going to drop the baby. Steve, my partner, is going to catch the baby. We're going to take your wife to the hospital, put your baby in a foster home. You're going to jail. You're going to have a very, very unhappy Christmas." Now, here we go. 1, 2, oh, stop, no, I'm sorry. The guy starts crying, right? He believed my proposition, and he broke down and cried. And I saw him 3 weeks later walking down the street. He was an out-of-work musician. He got a job. He stopped and thanked me for intervening.
Yeah,
okay, and it kind of woke him up because carrying your baby down the street at 3 in the morning in the middle of winter is not a thing you're going to get, survive. So that method, it worked, and it wasn't, it was persuasive. Let's put it that way, okay? But when you break that cycle, that's when things start changing. The trick is, how do we break the cycle to change this so law enforcement can do it early? And I think that's really the most important thing.
Yeah. And it's making law enforcement understand, I think.
Well, and
what it's about.
Yeah, and we have an expert today that's going to talk about that, because I think this is a really critical point. If we start at the law enforcement level, it's going to change everything. All these stats are going to change. So we will be back with our expert to talk about that after these messages on Security Guy Radio. Welcome back to Security Guy Radio with Chuck Harold.
And Paul Bristow.
We're talking about domestic violence today and a new approach to solving some of these problems. Really, Brian, the engineer? Security breach? Where'd that come from?
It's embedded in the song.
That is not embedded in the song.
I made it so it
He
would
put
be.
it in there.
Yeah.
Oh, you're using your creative license. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's all right. I'm glad you just didn't, play a Broadway musical during our serious topic of domestic violence. So we're talking about domestic violence, and we gave you some stats in the first segment. We think there's a solution for this. My guest today is Rebecca Mahan, who's written a book called V.O.T.E, which stands for Victims Overcoming Traumatic Events. Her website is voteprogram.com. That's V.O.T.E program.com. The book focuses on domestic violence and techniques detailed that can be applied for the basic police officer. So when police officers show up, they have new tools now to prevent some of these things and make some of these stats go down. So welcome to the show, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So give us a little bit of your background. I was looking for your bio here in the back of the book, and I didn't really see that. But,
It's inside on the back.
on the inside of the back.
You got to open the book.
I read the book. That's not. Oh, here we go. All right. I beg your pardon. So Rebecca spent 15 years studying domestic violence and working with victims of various traumatic events. She's been employed for over 7 years, now 10, as a law enforcement officer, and has been a field training officer for over 4 years. She obtained her California Post, Intermediate, and Advanced certificates and holds a private investigator license. She's been a published columnist for over 5 years, and she is also a United States Marine Corps veteran. Now, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
That's a much better introduction. All right. So what is V.O.T.E? Tell me what V.O.T.E is.
V.O.T.E is a program for law enforcement officers and any other first responders to domestic violence or other types of traumatic situations, primarily domestic violence. But the program itself can be applied across the board to any type of traumatic event that happens to someone.
So what is law enforcement's current definition of domestic violence? I mean, there's some standardization now across the country, but is it still kind of going back to the old, cohabitating spouse definition, or are there new versions of it?
It is, and it can be applicable to anybody that's living in the same home, or has had a past relationship with someone.
So when I was a cop and Paul was a cop, we talked about earlier, we showed up. If the wife wouldn't prosecute, we couldn't do too much about it. As I was retiring, they changed the laws a little bit and gave us some more ability to arrest people because we knew that worked. We knew it broke the cycle. But we never really got too deep into causation. Wasn't our job. Our job was clean up, stop the situation. Hopefully we do it so we're safe when we go home, because that's a high place to get injured as a police officer in a domestic violence situation. How are police looking at domestic violence now? What has the way they perceive it changed, I suppose, is the best way to how they handle it?
I think it depends on the agency. Some are, looking at domestic violence and how to combat that, because it is one of the most dangerous officer safety type of situations that law enforcement can face. And I think there still is a number of people who have that same philosophy, that the problem was at home. There's not much we can do to change it, or maybe it's not something that I need to get involved with. But as many of us know who've been in law enforcement for any length of time, we wear a number of different hats. And based on just the statistics that you mentioned at the top of the show, a lot of times women or men, any type of victim of domestic violence, it goes underreported. And so generally speaking, law enforcement doesn't come out until a relationship has gotten to the point where they cannot control it anymore.
Well, that's an interesting way to look at it. So you're suggesting that a simple squabble that goes on for 2, 3, 4 years turns into the culmination of a violent event.
It can. And, based on just different types of information that's out there on domestic violence, you'll see that there's a cycle. And the domestic violence cycle begins with the honeymoon period. So people don't go into a relationship thinking that they're going to be fighting with that person or even have any type of, negative behaviors, against the other person. But they go into it with, just bliss. Everything's joyful, peaceful. They're in a very, healthy state for the most part, hopefully. And from there, it goes to a tension building stage. And during that tension building stage, which is where you're at the fighting and the squabbling, it's argumentative, there's unhealthy things being said, behaviors being done, and over time, it becomes explosive. And each time the cycle goes back around into the circle and begins with the honeymoon stage. What will happen is, and this will depend on the couple as well, the cycle is going to get shorter and shorter.
Before the violence erupts, you mean?
Yes.
Oh,
and
okay.
so each different type of argument is going to become, it can become sooner versus a later event. So, and not only that, but what happens at the explosive stage is somebody has said something or done something to get the other person's attention. And so that worked for that particular time. And it may work for a couple of more cycles.
Yeah.
But eventually it just doesn't have the same impact on the person, the receiver, as it initially did. So the person's looking for something a little bit more impactful to show that they're, feeling hurt, which is a fear-based issue. But they're feeling hurt and they want to get their message across, and it's not being heard. So they're looking for something bigger.
Oh, this is the key to escalation right here. Is
correct.
Lack of a better word, ego-driven behavior.
Yes, in blanket terms, it's power control issue.
Yeah. So, when the coppers arrive, I mean, what's their approach now, and why do you think it needs to be different?
Okay,
from what's happened with law enforcement or paramedics, I presume, or anybody, right?
Right, any
up.
first responder. Yeah. Basically, law enforcement's response right now is if they go out to a home where there's been a call for domestic violence, they assess the situation, regardless whether the victim decides to prosecute or not. The officer's gonna act on behalf of the state for the victim, and if there is certain elements that meet the penal code for specific domestic violence sections, then somebody's going to be going to jail. And in essence, that could just, basically mean if they can see that there's any type of physical abuse that has been put on the victim, or both parties, they're both going to jail.
They arrest both parties.
They do.
And let the DA sort it out as who's going to get prosecuted or what?
Yes, they do.
All right.
So does that need to change, or I mean their approach, or
sounds like they're handling it. What's different?
Yeah.
It's getting handled. I mean, what's different is that the victim is not having to make a citizen's arrest and have the law enforcement then act on her behalf.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit more frightening for a victim because now the aggressor has blame to put on the victim. You had me arrested versus now, the officer just did it. I didn't have any choice.
That's true.
So there's less as far as the negative, unhealthy, portion that's being targeted towards the victim, at least in that respect.
So we have the police showing up. The police have new powers of arrest, way more than when Paul and I were young cops.
Well, we actually had some good powers of arrest in England.
Well, that's true. It is a little different in the United States.
It was just over here that the problem was.
Yeah, that's true. So let's explain what V.O.T.E is, what your V.O.T.E program is, how it came about, and how you developed it. Where did this idea come from? What does it do?
This goes back, just to the beginning of my relationship and business experience, different things that I've learned in law enforcement. And I compiled all of these things together to see what I could do that would make someone's relationship healthy, people to be successful. So if we can become successful business people, why can't we do that within our home? And so I took a lot of the different techniques that I use business-wise and figured out a way to implement them within the law enforcement platform, and then tested the program to see if it would work.
Where'd you test it?
Sutter County Sheriff's Department. And they initially allowed me to test it for 1 year. So let me just go back to one of your questions about how law enforcement responds to it now.
Yeah.
So in just a simple version, law enforcement responds. Somebody may or may not go to jail. The situation then has a report that's taken, goes back to the agency, and it's handed off then to their DVIU, which is Domestic Violence Investigation Unit. Okay, now somebody else is going to be contacting the victim or the aggressor.
Now, does every law enforcement agency have that unit now?
I
Mostly?
can't speak for every agency, but I can say that large agencies do.
Okay.
And so the initial parties, the victim and the aggressor, has been contacted by
The patrol officer
the
first.
patrol officer
right.
first. Now it's going to domestic violence investigation unit, and it may even go out to outside agencies. So
Oh.
we're talking a number of parties involved, which is not what the victim wants, because as we know from what you read during the first segment here, it goes underreported as it is.
Yeah.
You think that's a cause of the underreporting? That too many people get involved, everybody knows their business?
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. It makes sense.
Yeah,
It's
oh,
logical.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we take V.O.T.E, and we're going to put V.O.T.E on top of the current responses from law enforcement. And what's the objective?
The goal is to minimize officer safety, so
Maximize officer safety.
Right, maximize officer safety, minimize any type of victimization, and the aggressor's a victim as well, and so are people within the home and neighbors and things like that. There's a lot of people that are affected by what's going on. So the goal is to really minimize any of these events that's happening within the home, because it's going to benefit a lot of people.
So when you put this program in place, it ran for a year,
Yes.
and what were the end results?
97% the first year,
97% what?
we did not go back to those houses
Oh, that's
for
interesting.
calls for domestic violence.
There was a 97% drop in second responses to a domestic violence home.
Correct. And
Yeah,
that's
pretty
huge.
amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's huge. And so that frees up the agency's time to focus on other types of calls for service as well. So, we're having officers' lives that are not being at risk for those types of calls, which is one of the highest calls for service,
Yeah.
where an officer is going to be either severely injured or lose his or her life.
I literally thought I was going to die on that call. I mean, guy trying to take my
Yeah.
gun, no backup. It's a serious matter, and I can see that.
And most coppers ain't ready for it. I don't think that's the problem.
No, I mean, you're not
Yeah.
trained to have
Yeah.
two people attack you when you're there to
Yeah.
protect one of them. I
Yeah.
mean,
Right.
it's kind of a
Yeah.
weird response. 97% reduction in second calls. Now, when you say second calls, are you saying law enforcement agencies tend to never come back to that house again? And
Correct.
they go get counseling, they get help, something happens to change.
Correct.
Maybe they get divorced, which is fine too.
That's okay too. And
Yeah.
initially, on an officer's initial response, they're required by law to provide a resource pamphlet
Right.
to the victim. So the resources are there. But where does it go from that point on? And that's what this program's about.
All right. Very good. 97% reduction.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
Amazing.
We will talk about V.O.T.E in detail and how law enforcement can apply it and how it's going to benefit them when we return on Security Guy Radio. Welcome back to Security Guy Radio with Chuck Harold.
And Paul Bristow?
Today we're talking about domestic violence with police officer and author Rebecca Mahan, talking about her book V.O.T.E, V-O.T.E, standing for Victims Overcoming Traumatic Events. So first segment we talked about stats and domestic violence. Second one we kind of talked about this V.O.T.E program you had and how officers respond, but not sure.
Well, I'm sitting here and I do not know the logistics of what we're talking about. So how it actually works and
Yeah, walk us through
how you put it in place and
what's
what
different.
it actually does. What's
Okay.
the difference? Yeah. That's where
how are
we're
the
at.
coppers responding? What
Yeah.
are they doing differently now that they didn't do? But if that number you had last segment of there's been
It's
a
amazing,
97% reduction
Yeah.
in return calls for service at a household is beyond comprehension. And you said during the break that that's continued that number down to like 95% now.
Yes, up
Yeah.
until the time I published books. So
So let's walk the people through what the police are actually doing now and how they're responding differently with this V.O.T.E program and how that's been successful.
So an officer that decides that they're going to institute the V.O.T.E program takes on the responsibility of doing follow-up with the victim and even the aggressor. So the initial officer that responds to the call, is assigned to the call, will follow up with the victim approximately 1 week later, about the same time that they went on that call.
So we're not passing it in this program, in the V.O.T E program, we're not passing that off to the investigating officer, the detective, the unit.
Correct.
It's being handled by the first responder.
Correct. The initial officer builds rapport
Okay.
with the parties that are involved when they go there. That person's secrets and all the things that were aired They do not need to be handed off to someone else and disclosed to other parties. It's maintained within the trust from the initial officer that came out and the persons involved. So what happens is the officer then goes back a week later, and it can be just a 5-minute, hey, how you doing?
Right.
They do this for 4 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Now, do they do this even if there's been an arrest?
Yes.
So the guy,
And-
somebody gets out on bail, they still come back and check up.
Yes.
All right.
And I'll tell you two things. First, though, the victim has to say that it's okay.
Do you want to get a signed permission slip or something for that, or is
They
it best
could.
legally?
They could, I mean, if the department felt that there could be a liability issue. But the more signing you have going on and things like that, the victim's being very, very apprehensive. So it can be done in a very, very friendly way, professionally as well, talking to the victim, hey, do you mind if I come back and check on you in about a week? Is that okay with you?
So how does the department, and this is throwing you off a little bit, but how
Okay.
does the department deal with the logistics of that officer going back week after week if he's a patrol officer? I mean, does he have to keep notes? Does he get reminded by his supervisor somehow? I mean, how does that work from a logistics point of view?
The officer would keep notes for those particular calls. In the book, there's a beat time management program,
Okay.
and it's a template so that the officer can follow this exactly how it needs to be done. There is downtime in law enforcement, and in the event that, say, a week later, an officer is receiving a call for service at the time that they were going to go make their 5-minute check, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
You just go back, maybe the next day or something
When you
like
can
that,
get
or you
back
can
there.
make a phone call. These don't always have to be in-person visits. However, it's successful because a couple of things happen when the officer comes back out a week later and does it for 4 weeks. The victim feels like they have a support system.
Yeah.
The second thing is the aggressor knows that law enforcement is coming out and their behavior is being monitored in some fashion.
Well, the old school way to do it was to take the husband or boyfriend out for a cup of coffee, take him for a little ride. And when he came back, after he was spoken to and tuned up, as we said, they tended to not do it again because they thought we were going to come back. And I actually did come back sometimes. I don't know if you
Yeah.
ever did that. But
No, we used to.
I was, if it was a really bad case and we just couldn't do anything legally, you just knock on the door and say, hey, welcome, Mr. Aggressor. I'm here to see your wife, make sure she's okay. And that did work. So I can see how what you're talking about is effective.
It does. And the community, the neighbors that are, seeing what's going on, they like officer presence in their communities.
Well, it almost gets back to the community policing.
It does.
Which I always.
Well,
think
all this is
missing in the
incorporated
US.
from-
Yeah.
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 Okay, I see
yeah.
contradiction, though, because the victim's reluctant to report in the first place
Mhm.
because of everybody knowing their businesses, right, of what's going on. So if the police come out one time and they try to keep it inside the house and try to keep their fighting quieter and not expose it more, and those people tend to wind up dead sometimes, right? Why do they want to sign off and say, sure, come by my house and stop by and say hi 4 more times? Is there an actual correlation between how many return calls you're going to make if you do this program and how many return calls you're going to make if you don't do this program?
Yes. If an officer is doing this and the victim is agreeing to have you come, obviously the rate is going to go down because it's proven to have done so already.
Okay.
And, she's-
Okay.
and they're getting involved as well.
Well, and they're
aren't
showing
the
up,
victim is,
they're showing up in a friendly
you know,
manner.
yeah.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
not, and
Yeah.
and see, that's great for the department as well as the officer, because what is the typical thought of a police officer just in general?
We want to arrest
Yeah,
people.
flying around
Right. I
and
mean,
stuff.
it's kind of a negative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
all
even if you're driving down the road and you see
Yeah.
a police officer, in your rearview mirror, what are you
Yeah.
thinking?
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
my
I'm in
goodness,
trouble.
Well, I'm
right?
thinking I better
Okay.
slow down.
So part of this also really gives a more positive light on law enforcement, that we're actually, taking the time to be involved with our community or with our
yeah.
citizens, which when we're going calls to calls to calls and we're not taking the time to even get out and stop at the local gas station and talk to the attendants in
Yeah.
there and things like that. So the contact is really huge.
Well, there is downtime. I mean, I have some buddies at LAPD that go call to call to call. I mean, that does happen. But for the most part, if you're a motor, if you work in traffic, if you're patrol, you do have some time once in a while just to stop by and just
Yeah.
knock on the door and say hi. It just takes a couple minutes to say hi. You're not talking about having a barbecue for
Correct.
45 minutes. Right.
Not going in for coffee. It's just,
Right.
hey, just wondered how you're
Yeah.
doing.
Now, here's what I want to know. I come back, what is to prevent me from looking like I'm hitting on the wife or hitting on the husband?
Actually, I was just gonna bring up
nowadays.
something similar.
Yeah, I mean, I could
Yeah.
see where if you come back with that little personal touch, and I know the part about getting consent. That's probably one way to handle that is to get consent, right? I could still see, I don't know, female victim gets upset and now she's in trouble with the husband and now she makes an allegation against the police officer because he's coming over and asking her out or something. I mean, has it happened? How do you avoid it? I don't know.
I think that can happen on any call, not just domestic
That's
violence.
for sure.
Okay, I mean, including traffic stops.
Yeah.
We know cops, that's for sure.
So, the officer just really needs to maintain professionalism at all time. A lot of officers wear recording devices now on all contacts. I mean, that's possible.
Oh, that's
too.
true. Yeah.
And so,
Are you going back with your partner usually? Well, not all units or police departments have two-man units. I mean,
Right.
a day shift
Yeah.
might have a one-man unit. Yeah, but
Right.
I would bring a backup just to be safe.
and I would say time. So, if the officer's showing up at midnight, even though that was 1 week later at the same time, probably go back
Yeah,
before
yeah,
10 o'clock
yeah.
at reasonable hours.
Well, and in between 6A and 6P, right?
Right,
To
just like-
hit the window or whatever.
Just
yeah.
like when you're serving a warrant.
Right.
So professionalism is just of utmost importance. If an officer is very, concerned about that, using the recording device is always, most agencies on any contact are having that. I shouldn't
Yeah.
say most.
Yeah.
A number of
A lot.
agencies are utilizing recording devices, and then also documentation, because there is a template, and if you open the book, you can see what
Oh, yeah.
what
like
it's
that.
asking there.
Yeah. How to keep
So-
track of it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Right. So it's
Oh.
even asking comments and then there's a place for
Yeah.
notes and things like that. The officer wants to document these things.
Yeah.
Definitely will be helpful down the road because you can carry the same case number all through the same parties. Whereas when the district attorney's office is trying to determine how this situation
Yeah.
has evolved or how many times law enforcement's been going on, how many what's this particular person's behavior, if you have the same case number, you're able to follow these parties, even though normally what happens is any incident is a separate case number.
Do you find that new evidence emerges as you do subsequent visits?
No,
Maybe the
no,
wife
no.
didn't want to talk
Victims
initially,
open
but
up.
then the second visit she says, you know what, come here, I want to tell you what happened 3 months ago, 3 years ago. I don't know.
That absolutely can happen. You're building rapport with that party.
Right.
And you're also providing resources. So let's say there's a situation that happens where you can't prosecute on that, or maybe the victim does not want to prosecute.
Right.
At least you can determine what types of crimes happen, whether it was a rape, whether that was just, there's a number of different factors that can happen, or I should say, number of different things that can happen. And then you can determine which route to really, encourage your victim to look at resources. Also, if the aggressor's there and you can share with that particular party that there's resources for behavior management programs, those are things good to do, good things to do as well.
You ever had a case
So-
where it started out as a misdemeanor and after, some follow-up and visits, it opens up into some hellacious felony of, serious abuse or injury or things like that?
Yeah, a lot of things come out later.
Yeah, not that it looks like it's stopping the future behavior. I'm talking about, do they release information about past behaviors? And then you've built a rapport with these people, and maybe you have to act now. Maybe you have no option except to arrest somebody after they've been told this information.
And the victim's going to know that, because when you're communicating with them, you're going to let them know, let me tell you, this is what the state is going to require me to do. However, I am here and we're going to give you the resources that you need. Many victims don't even realize that there's state assistance and funding that's
Has anybody
available.
used it against law enforcement? Not against law enforcement, but use law enforcement as a tool to better their divorce or something? These kind of, when they use your program?
I don't know what you mean by that.
We'll talk about when I come back from our break on Security Guy Radio. Back in a minute. Welcome back to Security Guy Radio. I'm Chuck Harold,
And Paul Bristow.
talking with Rebecca Mahan, author of V.O.T.E, V-O.T.E, Victims Overcoming Traumatic Events. Right before the break, I was asking, if this program has ever been used to, I don't know, to better a divorce or something. What I was getting at is, if I arrest you because you punched your wife in the nose, that's a pretty straightforward case. I come in and testify to that only. You are convicted or acquitted, and we're done. But if I'm constantly going back to the house, maybe let's say in a 4-week increment, and I'm learning new information and I'm watching the two interact, am I going to get a subpoena from the divorce lawyer that says, Officer Harold, what did you see those 4 weeks? I mean, that could tie me up for a long time in depositions. You see what I'm saying? I just wonder if that's ever happened yet.
I don't know of any case that has happened, but in the same respect, if the officer wasn't gaining that information, they're going to be getting calls for service for
a crime instead of a civil
Correct.
issue. Well, makes sense.
So, but not only that, it's okay. So as far as a situation like that arising, if an officer is keeping great records and they do a great report, they don't necessarily need to go to court anyway.
That's true. That's true.
And personally, I like to write my reports well enough so that my report stands alone and they don't need additional testimony from me. But I mean, certainly that could happen, but I don't know of any time that it has.
So we have a change in domestic violence laws years ago. We have a new technique called V.O.T.E, which is a different way for the officers to respond. And Paul made a good point. It's kind of a parallel style to community policing because you're getting back to the old footbeat, talking to people, knowing the people in your neighborhood, knowing who they are and what their needs are, and that's very effective.
And this is a great opportunity for an officer who's looking for a project. Many sergeants are, asking their officers to come up with some kind of cops project. Yeah. This would be a great opportunity to at least try the program.
To put vote? You mean to put the vote into a police department?
Correct.
Yeah.
So where do we go after the 4 weeks? Excuse me. So where do we go after the 4 weeks? So you've had 4 weeks of the copper going back.
You can check in about 3 or 4 months and then a year and see how they're doing.
And if you do this, let's look at, we said the 97% reduction in return calls for service or any more arrests, basically, or injuries or whatever, right?
Right. Anything.
How many calls for service was that study done under? I mean, did you get 300 calls during the Sutter Sheriff's Department?
I don't remember what the stats are. I don't have them.
But it wasn't like 2 calls. It was like a bunch of...
No, this is over a 1-year period
a busy
of time.
Sheriff's
We're talking
Department.
for a county.
Yeah.
A whole
county. So, but it works. And...
So how did the county connect, I mean, just from a logistics point of view for a police department, how did the county connect future calls to that particular family? I mean, did they somehow manage to get the same coppers back there or back involved?
Most agencies work off a CAD system, a computer-aided dispatch system that, continues to maintain housing addresses and phone numbers and things like that. And so if a call for service comes up at 1234 Jones Avenue, that's going to be in the system for that call. And when 1234 comes up again, it's all documented to that house. Okay. So there's history on that house. Yeah. An agency can look up an address and find out what calls for service has been there, even though there's been different residents.
All right. So how does an agency get started utilizing this program?
An officer decides that today's the day that they're going to put the program into practice and they're going to start coming back a week later. It's very simple. And in the event that it doesn't work, the greatest thing about this is you can just pick up and do it again.
We should have asked one of our chief guests about that. I could see a chief saying, well, maybe I got some liability here. What are some of the objections to the program? I know this works because I did it in different ways.
Well, it makes sense.
It's common sense. It doesn't seem like there's any cost impact, right?
There's very little cost impact when it comes to the department. The department just has the officer that's going back, and if they're in the area, and like I said before, you don't always have to go back. These can be phone calls. So
that's true.
The year program. I mean, after the first 4 should be visits, and after that, phone calls. You don't want to continually live in that particular neighborhood, right?
And this is really focused in on the uniform side of the police department.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, strictly, really.
Okay, let me quickly go back to the liability portion. There's no difference between that and it being handed off to a DVIU because they're going to make contact with the victim anyway.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's
okay,
true.
so that there's very little impact as far as that kind of thing goes. Very little cost. In fact, if there would be a cost, it would be to start offering some type of classes to the community. They can come to their department or a place that they decide to, say, rent or borrow a hall or something
What-
like that and offer classes.
What kind of resistance do you get from police officers when putting the program in place? Do they
Uh,
argue with you and say, no, that doesn't work that way?
Not that, it's just that, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I can see them coppers.
But
saying that.
officers wear many hats, and we do take the time to listen to people and offer different resources. And so this isn't about solving their problem, but showing that there's a support system for them and where they can get resources. Most of them are not going to discuss this with people that they know, including their family.
Do you find that most coppers actually have that information? I mean, that's
It's required. Because
okay.
on any type of domestic violence contact, the officer by law is supposed to leave a resource pamphlet with
Right.
the victim.
This is in California.
Correct.
Yeah.
Do you think but do you know of any other states that, I would imagine other states do it.
I think
but
there are other states that do it, and if they're not, they really should be, because
Yeah.
this is really the biggest challenge is where do I go to
Oh,
get
yeah,
help and
absolutely.
how do I get out? I don't know how to do it. And there's a number of reasons why people stay. A lot of officers are kind of with the perception that, well, they can get out anytime they want. And it really is not the case at
Yeah.
all. There's a number of different factors that play into why people stay in the relationships that they're in. And back to what you said at the beginning, it's in the home, then the teenage. It's what I call a relationship boot camp for children in the home. And they're gonna repeat these things.
Right.
So it's family oriented. It's seen. It's patternistic, and there is just a number of factors why people don't leave.
Did you get any feedback from the victims
I've had
as part of
I've
the
had-
study? Or
Yeah, I've had very successful outcome with the victims.
what winds up happening? Do the spouses reconcile? Do they get divorced? Or I mean, what
It
usually
depends.
happens?
I had a particular victim that I worked with a very, very long time, and this particular victim's, without going into too much detail, spouse was law enforcement, which
Oh, that's
domestic
interesting.
violence is huge
Yeah,
in
yeah,
law enforcement. Okay,
A different agency than where the program was in place?
without going into a whole lot of detail, I can only tell you
Okay.
that
All right.
that I had a victim and I worked with her for a very long time. And some of the things are just, including techniques on making healthy choices, better reactions, and things like that. You learn these just as peer support
Yeah.
or, things like that. But not all officers are going to be interested in doing that. And that had a very successful outcome, a very, very huge difference in the person's perception and things like that. But not all officers are going to want to take the time to do that. At very minimum, if they're making the contact saying, hi, how are you? I'm here. What can I get for you? I'm not sharing your information with anybody else. This is, we're talking here. They document in away they go. 5 minutes.
So how are you getting this out to other law enforcement agencies?
I talk-
How are we doing it?
So far, I'm
Apart
talking.
apart from on Security Guy Radio.
That's right.
This is a big opportunity here. I'm on Twitter, and I do a lot of networking as far as talking to people one-on-one, and I'd like to get it into hospitals, even including workplaces.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
that
that's a
there's-
very good
yeah.
point. It's very similar. That's right.
It is.
Yeah.
And trauma is trauma. We all respond the same way
Yeah.
to things that are negative in our environment. So any type of trauma, with some of the techniques that can be given to victims, are very successful across the board.
When you did this study at the sheriff's department, did they make it policy, or was it just volunteer to do it?
It's just a program.
That's a shame.
Just a
'cause,
program.
Yeah.
I really think that this is something that is going to be very, very effective
Yeah.
once
Once it picks up.
people get a hold of it and see how successful and how minimal the time is that they have to invest
Yeah.
in returning the
I
people's
can
homes.
see that being the biggest argument. This is going to take time.
It is.
Well, I think
but
she-
it isn't.
And
It's
actually-
not a
isn't.
good argument.
And
Actually-
it takes more time to come back.
In the book, there are some questions that officers may object to, and I have a response to that in there.
So what are these victims' triggers? Are they acting out of fear of being alone? Are they acting out of self-esteem issues? I mean, what makes one party, like you said earlier, escalate into, I'm going to one-up the last conversation and escalate this? What triggers these arguments that make people come out violently?
Okay, so I hear two different questions there, but I'm going to
I
try
only
and
give-
touch both of them.
Here's a quick example. So I get a call one day, knock on the door, woman comes to the door, she says, I want you to take my husband out of here. And I said, okay, where is he? He's at the dining room table. He's an older couple, 70s. Walk in the kitchen. He has a steak knife in his head. And I said, why does he have a steak knife in his head? I just got tired of listening to him all these years. And she sat down and ate her dinner. So this can go on for a long time. But unfortunately...
That's for another program.
Well, another program, perhaps, right? We're out of time. Well, Rebecca, thank you very much. Website, again, is voteprogram.com.
And I'd prefer if they email me at the voteprogram@yahoo.com.
Voteprogram@yahoo.com, okay.
That way I could address specific needs for the department or for those that are first responders and want to...
And that's spelled as it's said, voteprogram.com.
At Yahoo.
Very interesting.
At Yahoo.
Yes.
At Yahoo.
Well, thanks, Rebecca. Thanks for coming in. Very interesting. Tune in next time, next Monday at 7 p.m. for another exciting show on Security Guy Radio.
Cheers, guys. Keep safe.